Hi, this is Carlos Cousins, and the following is an ACT math test question that is asking us to evaluate this pretty complicated equation found here. We've got 2 sine of pi, 5 pi over 6. Well, we know right away 5 pi over 6 from our unit circle is 1/2. I mean, if you don't know your unit circle, I recommend that you watch a lesson on trigonometry and memorize those values. It shouldn't be that difficult. There should only be about 6 values, and the rest is just following a pattern. You'll see it's not that complicated. Followed by plus cosine of x. We don't know what x is, so we can't evaluate that. And all that over the tangent of pi over 2, which is going to be sine over cosine, right? So sine of pi over 2 over cosine of pi over 2 plus the cosine of 2 pi over 3, which for now, we are going to just evaluate to 1/2. And the reason you can do this is because, well, we know cosine of pi over 2 is going to give us 0, which is a horrible number to have here because that's not going to allow us to evaluate the equation correctly. So what we can do instead is try to change it so that the denominators of both of the sine of pi over 2 and the cosine of pi over 2 and the 1/2 in the denominator are equal. And once you do that, watch what happens. So up here we've canceled out 2 times 1/2 is just going to be 1. So this is going to be the cosine of x plus 1 over now 2 sine of pi over 2 over 2 cosine of pi over 2 plus sine over pi, of pi over 2, over 2 cosine cosine of pi over 2 over 2 cosine of pi over 2. So now that we've got the same denominator on both of these sides, what we can do is we can move this 2 cosine of pi over 2 up top. And that's going to look something like this. We're going to have 2 cosine of pi over 2 times the cosine of x plus 1 all over the 2 sine of pi over 2, which we know to be just 2 times 1, because sine of pi over 2 is 1, right? Plus the cosine of pi over 2, which we've already said is 0. So all we're going to have down here is just 2 times 1, so 2. And we've got a 2 up here, so these can now cancel out. And we're just left with the cosine of pi over 2 times the cosine of x plus 1. So that looks really nice now, because we can do is we can multiply cosine of pi over 2 times each of these. So we're going to have the cosine of pi over 2 times the cosine of x plus, all of that, plus the cosine of pi over 2. So all of this we know has to equal 0, right? Oh, whoops, never mind, not all of that. So what we can do now is we can subtract the cosine of pi over 2 to the other side. So that now, instead of equaling 0, cosine of pi over 2 times cosine of x is just going to equal negative cosine of pi over 2. Well, now we have cosine of pi over 2 on both sides of the equal sign. We can just divide both sides by cosine of pi over 2, and now we're going to end up with cosine of x equals negative 1. And when do we know that cosine of x equals negative 1? When x equals pi. So that's why pi is the correct answer choice. I'm sorry about the messy handwriting here. It took a lot of steps and I had to fit it in the video, but I hope that this helped with this problem. Happy prepping.